Hello, are you ready for another week? Let's go. We'll start with the Telegraph and an article with a caption under Christine Lagarde's face. Christine Lagarde called for substantial and mandatory recapitalisation to bolster European banks' balance sheets. In a remarkably gloomy assessment of the world economy, Ms. Lagarde warned that urgent action is required to stave off the threat of global recession and another credit crisis. In the article we read, sounding a stark warning to stronger European countries such as Britain and Germany, the new IMF chief said, "We could easily see the further spread of economic weakness to core countries and even more debilitating liquidity crisis." To reduce these risks, she called for substantial and mandatory recapitalisation to bolster European banks' balance sheets, which will be key to cutting the chains of contagion. Ms. Lagarde, who was speaking at the US Federal Reserve's annual forum at Jackson Hole, said the recapitalisation should first be financed through private channels, but could also be sourced from a Europe-wide bailout fund. So the EFSF or ESM that it is now could buy banks. Right. Later in the article, rumours have swept the markets in recent weeks, causing a number of high-profile banks to deny that they have liquidity problems. The French bank Société Générale was forced to issue a statement saying, "All market rumours were untrue." That's a classic, isn't it? All rumours are untrue. Doesn't matter what they are, they're all untrue. After it led a pack of French banks with plunging share prices. Of course, your share price plunges, it's harder to do an offering to sell more shares. However, despite Ms. Lagarde's concerns, only 9 banks failed the European Banking Authority's ECB stress tests in July, which meant they only had to raise €2.5 billion in total. So when she was finance minister, she was probably part of the political influence that told the stress tests to be take it easy on them and make it look good, so that'll give the world confidence in the banking system. Confidence just does not cut it anymore. Let's move to the United States of America, a Doug Short chart about real GDP. And the blue, red, greeny, purple colours are personal consumption expenditures. PCE, personal consumption, 70% of GDP. Gross private domestic investment, companies buying a new factory. Net exports and goods and services, the balance between exports and imports. Government consumption expenditures and gross investment. Obvious what that is. And the dotted blue line is the real GDP. We see it falling down in the Great Recession, coming back up, but 4% GDP. If that could have pushed on, it would have been very nice, but it hasn't. It's dropped down. And what Doug Short's pointing out in this chart more than anything is the blue, which is the personal consumption expenditures on the last quarter, is a mere sliver. And US GDP will go nowhere as long as personal consumption is a mere sliver. Moving on to Project Syndicate, where Stephen Roach writes an article called "One Number Says It All." He writes from New Haven, the number is 0.2% to you and I. That's a sliver. It is the average annualized growth of US consumer spending over the past 14 quarters. calculated inflation-adjusted terms from the first quarter of 2008 to the second quarter of 2011. Never before in the post-World War II era have American consumers been so weak for so long. This one number encapsulates much of what is wrong today in the US and the global economy. He writes his article, and we get to this at the end. Instead of what he'd written earlier, the US needs a menu of policies tailored to the needs and pressures bearing down on American consumers. Some possibilities are debt forgiveness to speed up the deleveraging process, creating savings policies that restore financial security to crisis-battered Americans, and of course jobs and the income they generate. The US economy, as well as the global economy, cannot get back on its feet without the American consumer. It's time to look beyond ideology on the left as well as on the right and frame the policy debate with that key consideration in mind. A little something from me here. Let's go again. The US economy as well as the global economy cannot get back on its feet without the American consumer. This is fact, but can we see the absolute dangerous trap that this is? What is proposed here then is to get the American consumer consuming again, which will be good for American GDP and world GDP. But can we not see how stupid this is? I don't have to point it out to you lot, do I? I mean, it's like running a business and relying on one client or one major client as your major customer. Because if that major customer goes away or just doesn't come into your shop for a while, you're fucked. And that is the world economy, relying on the American consumer. So the idea is to get the American consumer consuming again. It can't be right. Right. Back in the United States, and the whole idea of the last, well, this chart goes back to 1990, but this is MBA purchase applications, mortgage applications, and we can see it went uppity up as the world tried to pour money into the United States to keep the American consumer going. The American consumer consumed on housing and ran that up, but now it's running down. It's down to levels of 1996 now. Gillian Tett, writing in the Financial Times, Gillian Tett. In any murder mystery, it pays to watch the boring grey man or woman. In the corner, quiet, unobtrusive characters can be deadly. So too in finance. 4 years ago, the giant US money market funds seemed some of the dullest actors on the global financial scene, but in 2007 they quietly helped to spark the crisis in the mortgage-backed securities world when they silently stopped rolling over bonds. Then in 2008 they furtively wielded the knife again, pulling funds from some American banks and the repo purchase markets. More about that one day, I hope. Now their shadow looms again, as my colleagues Dan McCrum, Tellis Damos and Jennifer Hughes have reported. In recent weeks, these funds have been quietly backing away from European banks, either refusing to roll over loans or slashing the maturities of the funds that they do provide. Fitch, for example, recently calculated that the largest US money market funds cut their exposure in absolute terms by $30 billion in July, even before the latest turmoil. Peanuts, you say? You see, America is rich. A lot of this money is pension money, and it's slopping around the world, and it's these money flows that are causing all the problems. Money is turning up in the wrong places. later we get from Suki Man being quoted, but it's worth watching that those money market funds, what those money market funds do next. For one thing, their antics tend to have a powerful impact on market psychology, particularly given folk market memories of 2008. Secondly, this quiet exodus has reminded US and European investors alike of something that policymakers have hitherto tended to downplay, namely the rather surprising degree to which Eurozone banks depend on short-term financing. That's what knocked Northern Rock off right at the start of this crisis, and really was the main weak point in all the Wall Street banks. Now we come to money that is not peanuts. Morgan Stanley, for example, calculates that of the 8 trillion euro funding that is currently in place for the largest 91 Eurozone banks, some 58% needs to be rolled over in the next 2 years. More startling still, some 47% of this funding is less than a year in duration. Much of that is in euros. 8 trillion euros needs to be rolled over. 60% of that, so that's what, 5.5 trillion in the next 2 years. Who's going to roll that 5.5 trillion? Will the money be in the right place at the right time? End of the World, Part 1 by John Mauldin. We have, this is quite into the article, it's worth reading the whole thing, he always is worth reading. We have a fundamentally different economic scenario than at any time in the past 66 years. Why then should we expect the same outcome? Every indicator, employment, GDP, ISM sentiment, etc., is far below its average result 2 years after the official end of a recession. That should speak volumes. Talking about the United States. So why does the CBO, Criminal Budget Office, something like that, congressional, because Congress is making projections for future deficits based on what appear to be wildly optimistic assumptions. That means future deficits are likely to be worse than expected. If we enter a recession, as I expect, then revenues will be down, as unemployment will be up and profits down, and expenses will go up. That de minimis deficit reduction currently being negotiated by the Gang of 12 will disappear in a cloud of smoke and maze of mirrors. This will mean that more pain in the terms of future spending cuts and/or tax increases will be needed. I know a fair number of congressional staffers read this letter, so pay attention here. Your bosses need to be given a heads up. They know full well. If we are in for a slow growth muddle through decade, then the deficit projections by CBO are dismally off. Get the spreadsheets, factor in slower growth and higher unemployment and 2 recessions by the end of the decade, typical for the aftermath of a banking debt crisis, and see what those deficit projections look like. I think that's a fair warning, but it won't make any difference at all to the CBO and other governmental projectors. They will project optimistic views. And even Mauldin here, if we are in for a slow growth muddle through decade, I think that's a big ask. Because if America doesn't get spending again, that the whole world economy has got itself in a state where the Americans need to spend 25 years they've taken to get this system in place where everything is predicated on American spending. And if they don't spend, the rest of the world falls apart, and then because now it is a global economy, that it is now locked altogether, it will be global recession after global recession, knocking back to America, out to the world. I think it's going to be very, very optimistic to get away with slow growth, muddle through decade. Factor that in, CBO. Have a good week.